Okay, Ashimhara here. Are you someone who is the ex of somebody with borderline personality and you have codependency and you're still in a world of hurt? And what happens for so many people, unfortunately, in these in-between times, after the relationship breaks up and before people really do their work, recovery work and healing from the relationship, from the deeper issues that underlie all of that. Like I said, it's rather a suffering sandwich, and it has two sides. It has the recent past, or however long it's been for you with the person with BPD, and what you experienced, and what is still confusing and very hurtful and beyond about that, and the rumination, etc. And then there's the inner child woundedness, which for some people with codependency is very severe. And some people have very severe codependency. So not everybody with codependency is the same. So here's the thing, right? Codependency is an externalized out, not the healthiest relational style, wherein people with codependency have a false self as well, and also have a lot of needs that have been unmet in childhood and that are still being unmet right now. And those repetition compulsions, cycles in codependency are, unbeknownst consciously to many people with codependency, they are being driven from the wounded inner child to seek reparation through relationships, and it doesn't work that way. So this is a response to a comment from David, who I replied to in my last video. And so that video was, I don't remember the title, sorry. I think it was BPD Relationship Breakups, 7 Tips for Codependent Rumination. And so on that video, I think Dave thanked me for responding to his comment about missing what could have been. And now David replies, AJ, thanks for your reply to my comment. I'm having counseling, but still in a world of pain. And regarding the inner child, I don't know where to start and don't feel strong enough. Let me just say, David is not alone in this. Not just men, but men struggle in their own ways with this. And I want to be really respectful when I say that. Women struggle in their own ways when they've been with a man with BPD, or if it's a same-sex relationship. So this, not knowing how to get to the inner child, not knowing if one is strong enough to do that. Fair enough, but guess what? It's the only way through this recovery process. It is a major gateway through this recovery process, because what will be, I shouldn't say unleashed, what will be opened up to be able to be healed from the wounded inner child is going to stop so much of what people, and what David is describing here, of what he's going through, because it's really not as much about the ex with BPD or even a narc ex as it is about the underlying pain from childhood that, kind of has its roots with one parent or the other, or the family system potentially. So David says, I don't know where to start, and I don't feel strong enough about the inner child work. Okay. It's almost like I would rather feel the familiar repetition compulsion cycles in codependency based on the woundedness of the inner child. And then the other factors of why it's so hard to let go of the BPD relationship, the ex with BPD. And then David says, by the familiar, he means the pain, the ruminating, and the missing. I'm completely stuck on the rejection and the hard fact that I will never have physical intimacy with the person again. And knowing she is sharing a physical intimate experience with someone else, even though I'm in a new relationship myself, I cannot stop looking back. And to David and anyone else in David's situation, be you a man or a woman, I want to say this with great respect, okay? But this is potentially high percentage, like 80, 90, 95%, being in another relationship with the way that David is feeling right now and what he's struggling with, and these very real, incredibly difficult and beyond emotions and feelings and lostness, and that overlaps again with the wounded inner child. To be in another relationship right now, I mean no disrespect whatsoever, but anybody like David who's in this place with all this woundedness, all this hurt, not feeling strong enough right now to look at their inner child work, just really struggling. And I'm sure lots of people can relate to what David's saying here. And I've had clients who will go on and jump into the next relationship, and it's never recommended. It's like really a recipe for disaster. So a couple things I want to say about that is that when people with codependency do that, especially suffering to the degree and the way that David is, and what's keeping him stuck, as he says he feels stuck, this is where codependence, you see, this is where the codependency comes into it. The idea, whether conscious or otherwise, that one is going to get with the next person and somehow that's going to help. But as David, and no judgment here, please understand, but as David says here, I'm completely stuck, okay? And you know, he's focused on that she's being intimate with somebody else, and that he'll never get that experience with her again. And even though he's in a new relationship, he can't, excuse me, he can't stop looking back. Well, with the greatest of respect, when people do this with codependency, unhealed from, you know, why they have codependency, unhealed from the relationship with the BPDX, and they go to the next person, there's two realities to this. Potentially, there might be more, but there's two key ones. One is that David has found someone who he's in a relationship with that is either going to be another cluster B, and he might not realize that yet, and that's going to set him up for like barely being able to cope if that's the case after, if he finds that out. That is a high percentage chance as well. And the other thing is, even if the person that he's with now is healthier, then this is the aspect of codependency and the self-avoidance and the running from what people really need to look at. And I understand it's daunting, especially in severe codependency. It's not simple. But what David is doing right now, with all due respect, is likely more about his codependency and his needs externalizing out onto someone else. Because how does it make sense to be in a relationship, a new relationship, when you can't stop looking back at the one you just got out of, or maybe got out of a few months ago or longer ago? But this is a recipe for disaster. And I strongly recommend to clients, I recommend to anyone who values my opinion here, who's watching my videos, minimum 18 months before you even think about dating again. Minimum. And for some people, it has to be longer than that because of the codependency recovery required. And because of the nature of the process of that work, and David doesn't feel strong enough to do the inner child work, but he's in another relationship. So my concern, not only for David, because there are other people in these situations, is that either he's with another cluster B and doesn't know it yet, or he's with somebody healthier, but then this becomes the selfish part of codependency. And I mean with all due respect, because for people in the situation, I don't want to just, single out David, but for people who are in this really stuck place and feeling not strong enough, or not, maybe getting counseling, but not working with somebody who specializes in this area, I don't know. But especially the inner child healing work, and within the framework of after a relationship with somebody with BPD, it's not just general inner child healing work. It then takes on a whole different kind of process. So what David is doing is his codependency and his pain is leading and led him into the next relationship, whatever else was involved there. But this is a recipe for disaster, and I can't stress it enough. People with codependency that don't take the time to heal and recover, not only from the ex with BPD, but from your codependency, or to get strong foothold in growing forth and dealing with the issues of the wounded inner child. How are you going to have a healthy, successful relationship? And when, as David said, he's still looking back. And I'm doing this video out of care and concern and empathy for anyone in David's position, and for David, but for others who may relate, because this is not fair to the next person, okay? And it's not even fair to oneself to skip over everything and look to that other person in one way or another, externalized out, maybe subconsciously. It's going to happen. You're going to look for too much from that other person. And in my experience of 30 years working with clients, etc., that most times when this happens, people find another cluster B. Not always, but most times. But then if they don't find somebody who's got pretty severe codependency themselves, maybe, or if they find somebody healthier, then the healthier person is going to begin to realize that David is very much likely not very present, I don't know, but with the other person in the new relationship, because he can't stop looking back and missing and wondering what could have been with his BPDX. Not the place to start a relationship from, is what I'm trying to say. And certainly likely, unlikely, highly unlikely to be a healthy relationship. So, and this can come out of, and I mean no disrespect or judgment with this word, codependent desperation. When you're hurting so bad, when, like David said, he doesn't feel strong enough to even do the inner child work, he doesn't know what to do, he's so stuck and feels so rejected, but he's still looking back. How can you start a new relationship with somebody and think that you're going to be present for them, or that that's healthy for you or for them, when you can't stop looking back, when you're still pining for someone else, when you're still in the cognitive dissonance and all the rest of it? And it's just, I hope people will hear me on this video. If you're thinking about this, or if you've just done this, you might want to really take another look at it, because this is the aspect of codependency. I'm not saying it's conscious. People having, and not all people are the same, but a lot of people with codependency cannot be alone, have so much trouble with being alone, have no ability to deal with their feelings after a relationship breakup of these sorts, or feeling rejected, etc. Sounds like there's still a strong addictive factor to the physical intimacy with the ex in the case of David, I'm sure many others. And so then how is it that you're going to go forward? Well, it's really your false self and codependency going forward to the next relationship. It's not your authentic self. You don't know that self strongly enough, if at all, and then you lose more of yourself when you're in these relationships with people with BPD or NPD. So this is a recipe for disaster. And what happens, I know, because I've worked with clients in this situation, doing and risking what David is. And maybe it feels all good right now, and maybe he thinks it's helping him somehow. But the gentle question is, not only to David, but anyone who relates to this, are you thinking about the other person? Or are you just externalizing out your own needs from codependency, from the woundedness and brokenness of the ex of BPD, and the inner child from one's childhood? So it's jumping from the frying pan to the fire. And it rarely ever works out. And here's the really risky part. For someone, David in his situation, or someone who can relate to this, the risky part is, and so if you are with a cluster B and you don't realize it yet because you jumped in and you're not ready, and you're focusing on missing the other person and can't do the inner child work yet, or hasn't had significant treatment and therapy to be able to work all this through, how's the choice going to be different? So that's the really risky part. And or that the relationship won't work out anyway, because people who are looking back and still missing what could have been and feeling so stuck, unhealed from the BPD relationship and unhealed from the inner child woundedness and unhealed from more severe codependency, nothing is going to be different for them relationally in the new relationship than it likely was in the previous. And then what is the most risky factor of this? Well, if David has ended up, and I don't know, or anyone that can relate to David, if you've ended up with another person really quickly, I've had so many clients do this, over the years, and they end up with another cluster B. So, and then what happens to them after that cycle plays out again? Some people don't survive it. Let me just be plain about that. They don't. And they're not still here. If you know what I mean by don't survive it. This is really risky business. And you need to be on solid footing and knowing yourself well and having healed, giving yourself time. Because one thing I want to say to David and anybody that resonates with this is jumping into the next relationship is not only not fair to the next person, it's not, not only really considering the next person enough, but it's also not reasonable for you, for anyone doing this, because you're negating and avoiding and throwing yourself into someone else, but you are not, finding self-esteem. And by the way, in another comment, David said he has zero self-esteem. So how's this relationship going to work? How's this going to be healthy for David or for whoever he's with now? And if this resonates with you, I'm not trying to pick on David at all. I have the utmost respect, and I know that he's a man who's suffering greatly right now, as many people are, men and women, after a BPDX or a narcissist X. But the thing is, so this is really important because people who leapfrog over their healing and recovery work, especially from the relationship but equally from codependency, are destined in the repetition compulsion cycles of codependency to repeat similar things. More often than not, end up with another cluster B. And then the consequences of what's going to become a triple wounding, if you will, are daunting. So don't sell yourself short. Don't jump into the next relationship. And if you have already, you might want to think about telling that person you need time, backing up, doing your healing and recovery work, because you owe that to yourself. And more importantly, you deserve that. And then you can be present with somebody else. But there's no way that anyone in David's situation, and or if you relate to David, is going to be able to be wholly present to the new relationship. And that's the other side of codependency. Probably not consciously, but it's not really thinking about enough about the other person, and it's more about the needs of the codependent who hasn't sought treatment. So I just like people to think about that. And David, I mean you no disrespect, and I hope that this works for you, but it's so dangerous what you're doing. It's so not recommended, and for good reasons, many of them. And you can't really go forward with somebody else. Certainly not in anything that won't either be that she's a cluster B, or that you're going to, or she's as codependent as you are, or she's healthier and it's not going to work out. You're going to get hurt all over again because you need time to create a healthy and functional relationship with and to yourself before you're going to be able to do that with anyone else. And maybe no matter how rosy it may seem right now and how relieving it might be to not be alone and be with someone else, but if you can relate to what David's saying, it doesn't even sound like being with someone else in a new relationship has changed David's focus at all about the past, the ex. He doesn't feel strong enough to do his inner child work. So if he's not with another cluster B, and if he is, it's going to be the same old, the repeat again, both sides. And if he's not with another cluster B, then he's really asking too much of somebody right now, because he needs to do this work and he needs the time, like anyone in this position, if you can relate to this. You need the time and the space to do your own work. You need to be able to go to the next relationship after healing, after getting your feet solidly on the ground, and when you're not so vulnerable. So it's not just about the next person you might go to and how likely they are to be a cluster B, versus if they're healthier, versus if they're really severely codependent and maybe they just broke up with a cluster B. Who knows? This is not a healthy trajectory. And when people are in fragile states after these relationships and don't feel strong enough to do their inner childhood healing work and other codependency recovery work in therapy, it's not the time to start a new relationship. It's a train wreck, likely one way or another, waiting to happen. So make sure that you put you first. And this goes to what I've been saying in the last couple of videos. The lengths to which people with codependency go to avoid themselves and to avoid the path toward recovery. And it is pain that's in the way, and it's what's in the way that is the way. Jumping to the next relationship isn't the way. Take care.